I like Batman, you like Batman, we all like Batman, so why is it so hard to make a Batman costume? Why do studios with millions of dollars at their disposal struggle to bring what seems like a relatively simple design onto the screen? Well, there's actually a bunch of really interesting technical and design reasons why this costume causes studios and costume designers so much difficulty. And we're going to get into them in this video as we review all of the cinematic Batsuits from a design perspective. I'm not really going to be worrying that much about comic accuracy or adaptation. I'm just going to be focusing on the design principles that these suits are employing and the problems that each suit solves and also creates. So to start with, why can't we just do what's in the comics, right? Why can't we just make this? This is just made of cloth, right? This is just fabric. Studios can afford fabric. Fabric is not expensive. Why can't they just do that? Well, the main reason that this suit doesn't work very well in live action boils down to the fact that, one, fabric does not work that way, and two, the human body does not work that way. So to start with, the fabric this suit is made of is impossibly shrink-wrapped to Batman's torso, right? You're seeing all of the contours of his abs and his pecs and his ribs and his muscles and stuff. And like, sure, yeah, maybe your actor's not going to be able to show off their musculature as much as, you know, the character in the comic is, but the problem here is that this musculature, this definition, is actually a part of the design, right? These abs are breaking up Batman's torso, and if you don't have them here, if we erase them, right, and we have sort of a realistic version of what this suit would actually look like, we end up with this giant void in his torso, right? Aside from the fact that this is not very flattering and it kind of makes him look a little bit chubby, from a visual design perspective, from just sort of a graphic perspective, we're ending up with this big empty space here. And, you know, this still looks kind of cool, but design-wise, you know, it's actually, there's just nothing there, right? We have a lot of visual interest up here, we have a lot of visual interest here, we got a lot of visual interest here, but there's just this big empty space here, right? So that's kind of a problem. That first of all makes the actor look a little bit schlubby no matter how in shape they are, but it also makes the suit design look boring. You know, it means the suit design just has nothing going on. So that brings us to our first live action Batman, Lewis Wilson here, who is wearing a very comic accurate suit. And we can see some of the problems with, you know, just doing things comic accurate, right? We can see the fact that he has no definition here, he has no definition here. And Lewis Wilson was not a slouch, he was not fat, he was not, you know, in poor shape or anything. We're just looking at the limitations of what fabric can actually do. And the other problem that I mentioned is that the human body doesn't work that way. So, you know, the issue with Batman's cowl up here, the cowl is ostensibly made of fabric, but it's also impossibly rigid, impossibly flexible, and impossibly, you know, stretchy. It conforms to his face, but it also holds his shape, but at the same time, it doesn't mess up the shape of his face, right? The artists are treating Batman's head as if it's a marble statue. The cowl can shrink wrap to the squishy parts of his face without, like, conforming them in any way. So, you know, again, fabric doesn't work that way, but also the human body doesn't work that way, right? The human body is, even on the buffest, you know, most, like, low body fat person in the world, the human body is still largely squishy. And so you can't really have a flexible cowl perfectly shrink wrapped to someone's head without mushing up their face like that, right? And also, you know, it's going to make it so they can't hear, it's going to make it so they can't see, it's going to cause all these problems. So when we look back at the Lewis Wilson cowl, right, this is, first of all, not very well constructed. One ear is bigger than the other, and you got these double horn ears. But, you know, this is what an actual fabric cowl is looking like. It's loose around these, you know, around the cheeks here. We've got this problem, it's bunching here. You know, it's not perfectly conforming to his head. You've got all this loose fabric here so he can actually turn his head, but of course that looks goofy. And from a design perspective, this is not something from the comics. This is just sort of a weird design choice they've made in the adaptation. If we look at this sort of line here, right, that's making his cheeks look really high. It's making his philtrum look longer. It's making his face look like it's shaped weird. So it is not the most flattering cowl design. And the other thing about the cowl design is that the cowl is sort of working as contouring for the actor's face. Like, you know how, like, when, you know, people put makeup on and they contour their cheekbones and they do all that? That's sort of what the cowl is doing. And so when you're designing the shape of this cowl line, you are changing the way the audience is perceiving the actor's head and their facial features. And Lewis Wilson, very handsome man, you know, if you watch the movie serial that this costume is from, which I don't think you should do because it's incredibly racist, you know, Lewis Wilson's Bruce Wayne is like probably the most comic accurate Bruce Wayne I've ever seen, right? He's very, very strikingly handsome. He's got a great jawline. He looks great. And yet this cowl is doing him zero favors. It's making his head look fat. It's making his cheekbones look too high. You know, it's just doing awful, awful things to his face. So, you know, not a good cowl. And we're seeing here the limitations of fabric technology and the limitations of trying to sort of directly translate this costume onto the screen. And also his belt is sparkly for some reason. So here we have the Robert Lowry batsuit, which is almost exactly the same as the Lewis Wilson batsuit, except we can actually see some improvements and some deprovements. Okay, so this cowl is a huge improvement, right? We've got this line here instead of it going up like that, right? That's good. The symbol is a lot bigger, which I think is a downgrade because it's making him as a whole look smaller. It kind of makes him look like a doll. The fabric of the suit looks like it's made of wool, which first of all looks incredibly hot, and there's a lot of pilling on the wool, which is not, you know, very aesthetically pleasing, but also it's not conforming to his body at all, which is, you know, not really doing him any favors. But the actual construction of the suit does look a little bit higher quality. The mask is conforming to his face better, as we can see. We're still having these like weird head shape problems up here, which you would get with a cloth mask, and you got the devil horn ears. But overall, I think the cowl is a huge improvement here. They're, you know, prioritizing having it fit to his face better. I think there's some kind of actual construction under here. It looks like they've got some kind of rigid mask under the cowl to make it fit like this, you know, because you're seeing a little bit of shaping up here, right? Which is the first time we're seeing that. Over here, there's no shape, right? This is just raw cloth. This is just fabric. It's just sitting, you know, however it's going to sit. Here they've actually put some kind of construction, some kind of boning in the fabric to make it conform better to Robert Lowry's face. But overall, I think the suit is generally an improvement, but it's almost exactly the same suit. Moving on to Adam West, we have the first time Batman's been in color. We've got the new look little gold circle behind the symbol, which was introduced in, I think, 1963, 1964, 1963. This is a very faithful translation of the Batsuit, but again, we're seeing some of the same problems, right? Adam West was not in bad shape, right? He was a very fit guy, and yet we're not getting any definition in his, you know, torso area. The sort of blue-black parts of the suit, you're getting a lot of wrinkling, right? You're getting a lot of sort of rumpling. The cape does not look like it was ironed. Some improvements over the Lewis Wilson and Robert Lowry suits we're getting is that there is this construction in the cowl, right? So we're starting to see, instead of taking the comic cowl very literally, they're starting to cheat a little bit by putting some rigid construction up here to make sure that it conforms to his face nicely. That's great. The one issue with this cowl is that we've got this very sort of bunchy fabric at the edges and around the neck, and so it's not conforming to his face the way the cowl in the comic does, which of course is not like entirely possible because the cowl in the comic is made of magic fabric that doesn't exist. But it is, you know, it's not, you know, doing him any favors, and it's not doing the suit any favors to have it be doing that. So that is one of the, you know, sort of fundamental issues of having a suit made out of cloth, is that, you know, the fabric is not going to be behaving in ways that fabric cannot behave. Overall, I love this suit. This is the suit that introduced me to Batman. I saw Batman the movie when I was like 5 years old, and I didn't realize that it was supposed to be like a parody. I didn't realize that it was supposed to be tongue-in-cheek. I thought it was 100% serious, and I fully fell in love with the character based on that movie. I went to the library. I got all the Batman books they had, which a lot of which were incredibly inappropriate for my age group. But anyway, I love this suit. I have a huge soft spot for this suit. The other big design issue with this suit, though, is the symbol is very low on his chest. It's almost at his solar plexus, and that makes it look like his chest is sagging. If it were up a little bit higher, I think it would make him look a little bit more imposing in the chest area. So if that were moved up to like there, it would make Adam West look, you know, a little bit cooler. Obviously, this suit is not intended to be taken super seriously, but still, you know, I think there's some material improvements that could be made with this suit. That said, I love it. I think it's great. And I think that Batman should probably not be too afraid of being goofy because, you know, he's a man dressed as a bat fighting crime. So here we have the Keaton suit, right? We have the suit from Batman 1989. And we're taking a hard pivot here away from Adam West and Lewis Wilson and Robert Lowry. I had a lot of beef with this suit when I was a kid because it was so inaccurate to the comics, but you can see why the decisions were made, right? The issues with the cloth suits, as we discussed, is that they can't hold their shape, which causes problems with the cowl and looking goofy up in that area, and they also remove all the definition from the actor's torso, right? They sort of squish down all the actor's muscles, and, you know, there's just this big kind of void area, right? This big void design in the torso area. And so by switching over to this rigid material, this sort of rubber, foam latex, whatever it is, Tim Burton and his team are solving both of those problems. That said, this pivot raises a whole host of its own issues. When you're building up all of this material around the actor's head, it's changing his proportions pretty drastically. One of the big lies of comics is that the superhero suit is drawn to human proportions, right? Because when we look at someone who's wearing an outfit, when we look at someone who's wearing, say, sunglasses, we read the sunglasses as being their eyes, right? And when we look at someone wearing, you know, a coat, we read the coat as being their body proportions. Even though we logically know that's not true, the way we perceive them is based on what they're wearing, right? And so when comic artists are drawing a character who's wearing a helmet or wearing a cowl, that cowl is drawn as the same size as a human head. Because if it were realistically drawn, if it were built up at all, we would read the characters having a really big head. And, you know, as any comic artist will tell you, the way you draw a cool, very sort of masculine, powerful-looking superhero is to give them a proportionately small head, right? We need broad shoulders, big chest, tall frame, and small head, right? Superheroes are usually 8 heads tall, whereas the average person is like 7 heads tall. This cowl is creating all of these issues where, you know, because it's a practical cowl and because also in the late 1980s material technology wasn't that advanced, you're building up all this material around Michael Keaton's head, and so we're reading this as the contour of his head, right? When we look at him, that's what we're reading, even though we know that's not really true. And the problem, too, is that we're building more up on the top of his head than on the bottom of his head, and so that means that his eyes are shifting down his head, right? They're shifting further from the top of his head down. And so that means that not only do his eyes look really low down on his head, they also look really close together. And that's exacerbated by the fact that he's got this black eye makeup around his eyes, which makes his eyes look even smaller. And so it ends up looking like he's got these beady little eyes that are sort of looking out from this giant, giant head. And when we zoom out and we look at the rest of his body, that giant head makes his body look even smaller. And Michael Keaton is not a very big guy. Michael Keaton, I think, was like 5'9". And so you end up with this very goofy-looking silhouette. And on top of that, you've got this sort of rigid kind of mantle kind of thing going over here, which makes his body look even smaller, right? It makes his head look bigger and his body look smaller. And, you know, the body is sort of being swallowed up by this giant mantle and this giant cape. And I understand why they went in this direction. I understand why they, you know, moved to this rigid material. But even barring the fact that it made it so Michael Keaton can't really move very well, and barring the fact, you know, that it's not accurate to the comics, purely from a design perspective, it raises about as many problems as it solves. And it does solve a lot of the problems, but it also creates new problems. And what I think is interesting, too, they went from a suit that was 3 colors, right, that was gray, black or blue, and yellow, and they reduced it down to 2 colors. So they had the cowl and the bodysuit the same color, and ostensibly made of the same material, right? And I understand why Tim Burton did that. You know, I understand the desire to have this sort of very gothic-looking character, but from a design perspective, from a visual design perspective, not having that separation between the head and, you know, the trunks and the legs and the boots and the gloves and stuff makes him look smaller, right? It makes his body not stand out as much, and so it's exacerbating the problem of his torso being swallowed up by the cape and swallowed up by the head. And so, you know, it makes his head look even bigger and his body look even smaller. And just for fun, I made this little edit of what it would look like with comic accurate colors, you know, just for giggles. And your mileage may vary on this, but I think this actually kind of fixes a lot of the problems that the rigid suit is causing, because it draws attention to his torso and to his chest. It gives the torso area more of a fighting chance visually with the cowl and the cape and all of that stuff. And so it feels less like he's being swallowed up by the cape and the cowl and the head area, and his torso is drawing more attention to itself. And by blocking these areas off, by having different colors on the gloves and these trunks and the boots, you know, it sort of draws more attention to his muscles, it draws more attention to the different sections of his body, and, you know, it's it's broadening his shoulders, and it's lengthening his torso, and it's making him look bigger and taller and more imposing. And he might not look as gothic, he might look more comic booky, which I think they were trying to avoid. But I do think, just from a design perspective, not even from like a comic accuracy perspective, I do think this does fix some of the issues. So I think switching to the all-black suit actually exacerbated a lot of the issues that they were trying to fix by switching to rigid materials, and exacerbated a lot of the issues that were caused by switching to rigid materials. So I do think that this was, just from a visual design perspective, kind of a mistake. So the Batman Returns suit has some superficial changes from the Batman suit. You've got the sort of more mechanical torso. I think there's some improvements in the material technology that they made a cowl out of, but the things it does well and the things it does poorly are kind of the same as the Batman suit. You've got this huge head, right? The ears are not helping. The ears are really tall, and that's just exacerbating the problem of the huge head. You got the same technical issue of Michael Keaton not being able to move very well in it. The mantle is, I think, less prominent in this. They've switched over to this kind of scalloped mantle, which is interesting. But I think this still has a lot of the same problems, where Batman ends up looking like this guy with an enormous head and a tiny body and like little beady eyes that are really close together. I do think the Batman suit looks better than this one. This is the Batman Forever, and this is really interesting because from a superficial perspective, it's almost exactly the same as the Batman suit, right? It's all black. You've got the sort of sculpted abs and stuff. You've got the yellow symbol. You've got the big cowl and stuff. But there are some improvements that are being made over that suit. Let me switch to a different picture, actually. This is a bad picture. There are some things that are improving, and there are some things that I think are actually steps backwards. So there are improvements in material technology. You can see that the cowl here is a lot closer to Val Kilmer's head than Michael Keaton's cowl was to his head. If we go to Michael Keaton's cowl here, we can see there's a huge amount of material that's being built up around his cheeks. This is a very thick cowl, right? And that, again, is contributing to this sort of beady eye problem. This cowl, much thinner, much more sculpted to Val Kilmer's head. The other improvement, which is less of a costume design improvement and more of a, I don't want to say casting improvement because I don't mean to disparage Michael Keaton's performance, but Val Kilmer is 6 feet tall and Michael Keaton is 5'9". So some of the big head problem is being reduced by the fact that you have an actor who has a proportionately smaller head. Instead of being up here, the belt is down there, and so you're getting more of his stomach, you're getting more of his abs, and that's elongating his torso and making him look taller. You don't have as much of a mantle. The cape is more sort of flowy. You can see here, right, there's less of a built-up sort of rigid mantle. And so his shoulders are able to kind of breathe on their own, and he's not being swallowed up by this cape. And, you know, that's allowing his torso to breathe. That's allowing him to look bigger. There's obviously the nipples here, which a lot of people had a problem with. I think they're kind of superficial. I could take them or leave them. I don't really care. One of the things that I think is a step backwards for this suit is the way the cowl is cut here. You can see the cowl is cut at an angle. You know, if we go back to over here, we can see the cowl is sort of swooping back. You know, it starts here and it goes back to there. Whereas as you can see over here, the cowl is swooping down. It's going the opposite direction. It's going like that. And as we talked about, these cowl cuts are almost like contouring for the actors' faces, right? As anyone who has done makeup will tell you, lines that go like that make you look older, right? Lines that go like that make you look sort of pudgy and old and schlubby. And so, you know, by cutting the cowl this way, it's not doing Val Kilmer any favors in the face area. It's aging him a little bit. It's making him look less imposing, less masculine, less sexy. And so I think if the cowl were sort of swooping back more that way, that would be a big improvement. But we are seeing, I think this suit is really interesting because from a superficial perspective, from a general design perspective, it's very similar to the Michael Keaton suit. But we're getting these improvements in sort of material technologies that are allowing them to have it be much more skin tight and much more conformed to his head. And it's reducing the beady eye problems and the big head problems. But also, from a design perspective, they are compensating for some of the problems that were caused by the design of the Keaton suit, and they're making him look, you know, more imposing and taller. You got a big-ass codpiece there. Thank you for that, Joel Schumacher. Say what you will about Joel Schumacher, but the man knows fashion. The man knows how to make someone look good, except for this cut on the cowl. That was weird. But you can also see there is sort of a shift in direction between the movies. You know, Batman in Batman 1989 is supposed to be kind of this cryptid, you know, he's supposed to be this creepy kind of like, you know, scary guy, whereas Batman in Batman Forever is, you know, a witness in a trial. He's a public figure. He's, much more well-known and well-loved. And so it makes more sense to go in this more kind of sexy direction for the suit. Less creepy looking, more sort of open and, public figure-y direction for the suit. So far, this is actually one of my favorite suits. I do love Batman Forever. I think a lot of people there's a lot of mixed feelings about that movie and people associate it with Batman and Robin. But I do think it's a pretty great Batman movie as far as things go. So in the movie, right, the Riddler destroys the Batcave, and so Batman has to break out the sonar suit, which I love. I think that's a great plot point. I like when Batman has multiple suits. It's all silver, which is interesting. It's a really interesting design choice because Batman's suit is gray, right? So, having the whole suit be silver from an adaptation perspective seems like just as much of a legitimate choice as having the whole thing be black. We have the return of the, big symbol, the non-yellow symbol, which I think is kind of neat. I think that was mirroring its return in the comics. We've got this sort of weird kind of Art Deco thing going on with his muscles, this very sort of techie thing. Visually speaking, I think the suit is great. I think we have an improvement over the last Val Kilmer suit in the way the contouring of the mask is. I think we do have a lot of buildup around here, and so we are getting some of that beady eye problem. As you can see, his eyes are, all the way in the middle here around this huge head. So that is kind of a problem. So, the sculpt on the cowl, I think, is kind of a step backwards, but the sculpt on the sides of the face is a step forward. Val Kilmer has a great jawline, and you're really working with that jawline. You're really sort of bringing that out. That's great. I don't think you're really having as much of the big head problem, even though you are having the beady eye problem. You got these nice broad shoulders. I'm not sure how much of this is, padding and sculpting and how much of it is actually just Val Kilmer's physique, but they are really emphasizing this silhouette of him being very sort of Dorito-shaped. And on the ab sculpts, you also have this very sort of Dorito-shaped, everything is sort of going in like that. It's making his shoulders look broad. This is good design, right? You can complain about it as a bat suit. You can complain about it being too silly or toyetic, as they say, but I think this is actually a really good design as far as things go. It would be cool if the cape and cowl and symbol were black and the whole thing were silver, because it would probably be like the most comic accurate suit we've gotten in years. But I don't hate it. From a design perspective, I don't hate it. I think it looks really good. I think his face looks really good. I think they're compensating for a lot of the problems. And I think what's interesting about these suits is that you can see that they are looking at what went wrong in the last suit and compensating for it and moving forward, right, with every suit. Even if the movie is not good, even if you don't like the movie, I think you can appreciate how they're sort of they're using these improvements in material technologies, but they're also sort of looking at, okay, this didn't work last time. Let's see, if we can make, let's see if we can compensate for that design this time, which we'll see even more of as, we move on through these other suits. Okay, moving on to George Clooney. This is interesting. We got another all black suit, except this time it's genuinely all black. There's no difference in color. It's actually kind of a blue. That's interesting. But there's no difference in color with the symbol. This raised symbol, I feel, looks more like a logo than an actual symbol, which I don't like. This is one of my pet peeves with Batman stuff, where the symbol looks like a corporate logo instead of looking like, an actual sort of symbol. George Clooney is a much smaller guy than Val Kilmer, and we are seeing kind of the limitations of his physique, and we're seeing some of the same design issues we've seen before. He's got a great jawline. And his head on its own looks fine. They're actually emphasizing his eye sockets a little bit more here because the black eye makeup and the blue cowl are a different color. And so by emphasizing this eye socket, we actually are diminishing the beady eye problem because we're sort of reading this whole thing as his eye, and that is cutting down on the beadiness and the close togetherness of his visible eyes. But when we look at the whole thing, his head looks enormous compared to the rest of his body. And part of that is just that George Clooney does not have very broad shoulders, but they're not really doing much to compensate for that, unfortunately. And so we are kind of getting, he does look kind of like a toddler, and is he wearing heels? It looks like there's a lot of heel on those boots. A lot of this just has to do with the actor they've cast, and here's the thing, I don't hate George Clooney as Batman. George Clooney hates George Clooney as Batman. Every time I watch Ocean's 13, I think, God, George Clooney would make a great Bruce Wayne. And I remember that he did play Bruce Wayne, and people didn't like it. But most of these issues, I think, are not really a problem with the design of the suit and more of a problem with George Clooney, not to be rude to him, not necessarily having the physique to fill it out, and the costume designers not really doing anything to compensate for the fact that he doesn't have that physique. But then again, this is a straight-on picture, and if we see the suit in action, it actually doesn't look bad. Going back to the head sculpt, going back to the cowl, we are, again, seeing this enormous improvement in materials technologies. We're seeing, look how close to his head it is. Look how thin that is compared to the Michael Keaton suit, right? That's a big improvement. That's a big step forward. We got this nice sort of brow sculpt that looks very comic-y. I like the ears. I like this cowl. I think this is actually the cowl that they used for all the Batman auditions for Batman Begins. And it is a great cowl, actually. And also, speaking of sort of the lines, I think they did do a pretty good job on this line here. This is an improvement over the Val Kilmer black suit. But I don't like this logo. I do think that they are not doing a very good job of compensating for the fact that George Clooney is kind of a small guy. With Michael Keaton, the mantle they put him in did kind of swallow up his body, but it also did make his shoulders look broader. And I think if they had found a way to kind of buff out George Clooney's shoulders a little bit, I think it would have helped with him looking as small as he did, because we've got these sort of rounded shoulders here, and if we had these be a little bit more angular, if we figured out a way to make these a little bit more, just this silhouette a little bit more Dorito-y, that's a technical term, that's a design term, Dorito. If we figured out a way to make them a little bit more Dorito-y, I think his suit would look a little bit more imposing. So moving on to George Clooney's second suit in this movie, and I want to make it clear, I actually don't hate Batman and Robin. I think I said it already, but I liked this movie as a kid. I like it now. I don't think Batman should be afraid of being silly. There's a couple of things going on here. I do think they've built out his shoulders successfully. I do think this suit from a silhouette perspective is kind of an improvement on the other one. I don't really like what they've got going on with the cowl here. This sort of scalloping seems kind of weird. It seems sort of fish-like. But the sculpt of the head is not bad. Again, we've got this differentiation in color between the eye sockets and the rest of the cowl, which is solving the beady eye problem. I do like the head sculpt. It's really emphasizing George Clooney's big square jaw, and they have built out the shoulders a little bit more to make him look more imposing. From a sculpt perspective, from a silhouette perspective, this suit is an improvement over the last one. The issue, obviously, is all of this stuff. This is a mess. There's no direction to it. There's no, sort of rhyme or reason to it. It's just kind of a bunch of stuff on him. And I've said I like it when the suits are broken up. I think if they did a little bit of this, and if they also swapped it, if they had, some, blue details on the crotch and on the chest and on, the gauntlets, and then they had silver details here, that would actually do a lot to, first of all, make George Clooney look bigger and also make the suit more legible and not all just one color. But the way they did it, it actually makes it less legible because it's just this cacophony of nonsense. There's just, not really a lot going on here. Also, I really don't like this ab sculpt because of the roundedness of it. It kind of just makes him look a little bit chubby. Makes it look like he's got kind of a pot belly. It's not making him look sleek or sexy. It just makes him look like a dad. I don't think the suit works at all. I think there's aspects of the suit that work. I think there's aspects of it that really don't work. And I think the aspects of it that don't work are drowning out the aspects that work. I think this is the better Batman and Robin suit of the two, but if we could just bring some of the improvements of the sculpt from this one into this one and, build out his shoulders a little bit and, maybe do some color blocking to kind of, differentiate his torso from his head and make the torso stand out a little bit more, this could be a great Batman suit. It is the best cowl so far. It is the most well-sculpted cowl, I would argue, of any of them we've seen so far. I love it, and there's a reason that they use it for auditions, I think. I may be wrong on that one. So, Batman Begins. From a narrative perspective, they really wanted it to seem like military surplus technology. They wanted there to be sort of a story behind how he got it, which I appreciate. We're still getting some of the same issues that we've been getting this whole time. Again, we have a huge head. We've got these beady little eyes. When this is shot, right, Batman is shot in shadow a lot of the time in the actual movie. He's well lit in this, promotional photo, but he's shot in shadow a lot of the time. And so we are getting the problem of his beady little eyes and this huge head. The head sculpt, we've got this huge building out around his head, which is making it sort of go in like that, which doesn't really make him look imposing. The mouth shape is not doing Christian Bale any favors at all, right? You're kind of getting this jowl problem. It's really close into the sides of his mouth, even closer in than it is in the comics. I would bring that back. I think it's too far in. We've got this line that's going this way and this line that's going this way, which is again in just exacerbating the jowl problems. The sculpt up here is fine. The sculpt here is fine. This is all fine, but this is kind of a problem. And also on top of that, the ears are kind of swooping in, which is again emphasizing these shapes, right? It's emphasizing this sort of kind of trapezoid shape, which is the opposite of what we want to make him look, sexy and imposing and masculine. There's very little separation between the head and the neck here. You know, this is kind of a problem with a lot of them, but it's especially a problem with this one. So if we go back to like the George Clooney suit, right, we can see that we got this nice separation line between the head and the neck. Even though they didn't even allow him to move his head, we still have that separation visually. Here, there's very little separation. We're kind of going backwards with material technology. This cowl looks really, really thick compared to the last one, which, you know, sure, from a storytelling perspective, we want it to look like it can, like, you know, block a baseball bat or something, but still, it's not really doing that much for me. The cowl and the rest of the suit don't really seem like they go together. You know, we're getting just this straight across line separating them. And then, of course, the cape is a different color than everything else. I do like the way they did the cape. I like the sort of flocked cloth instead of it being like a piece of plastic the way it was in all the other Batman movies. I love this symbol. This symbol is great. We're going to get into the Dark Knight symbol and why I don't like it later, but I love this symbol. This symbol is fantastic. It's really emphasizing the contours of his chest. It's making his chest look nice and big. This chest piece might seem a little much, especially in this picture, but it is, you know, he's got this nice big chest, right? He's got this nice imposing chest, and then all of the lines of his, like, you know, sort of contoured, tactical looking abs are going in, right? We have these, like, that's, you know, it's emphasizing this sort of Dorito shape. You know, everything here is emphasizing this sort of inverted trapezoid, so this is great. This is doing everything that this isn't. He's got these nice built out shoulders, he looks imposing. I like the belt. I like this suit from the neck down. I think the suit is great from the neck down. I think the cowl is a problem. I think it's, you know, kind of a step backwards as far as the sculpt of the cowl goes. You know, it's Batman beginning. Its first steps. From a narrative perspective, it kind of makes sense that the suit is a little janky. I think it's shot really well. I think Wally Pfister does a great job shooting it and making it look cool. But it also is one of the suits where the cinematography has to do a lot of work, a lot of the heavy lifting, to make it work on screen. And again, he can't move in it. You know, it's not very practical from a technical sort of perspective. There's a lot that's going on here that isn't really doing him any favors. In the actual movie, not in the suit, we can see the chest is less of a problem. The chest was kind of extreme in this promotional photo, but here, you know, it looks fine. The suit from the neck down looks great, right? We've got all these, you know, all the lines are going like that. Chest looks nice and big, shoulders look nice and big, he looks very imposing. This cowl, on the other hand, it's almost giving him a double chin, right? It's very sort of bunched up in the neck area. There's almost no separation here. This line here is not doing Christian Bale's handsome face any favors. The nose is great. I like the nose. I like this part. I like that part. I like these ears swooping forward. I think that's a great silhouette. I think they made an iconic silhouette with the ears. But the lower half of the face is the biggest problem with this suit. This whole area here is the biggest problem with this suit from a design perspective. But this part looks great. All this is great. So moving on to the Dark Knight suit. There are some huge technical improvements with this suit, but I think it's a step backwards from a design perspective. The biggest technical improvement, which is an improvement in universe and out of universe, is Batman's ability to turn his head, right? We've got this separation, we've got this helmet which is separated from the neck piece, right? So this is up here and that's down here. From a technical perspective, that's great. There are a lot of issues with this cowl. So we've got an even smaller mouth hole than we did in Batman Begins, which is making Batman look older. It's emphasizing the lines on his face. It's, you know, it's sort of creating these jowls around his face, which is not great. It's also curved down like this, and that makes the lower half of his face look even smaller than the top half of his face. And as we discussed before, the Batman cowls are building up on top of the head, which makes the eyes look like they're even lower down than they actually are, which, you know, creates this impression, exacerbated by the ears being tall, creates this impression of someone with, you know, really beady eyes and a huge head. This mouth hole is just exacerbating that problem. I'm saying exacerbate a lot in this video. I like these bits. These bits are great. And I like the sculpt on the ears. Again, the swooping forward ears are iconic. They're a great silhouette. Again, you have a way too small mouth hole, and that's causing these design issues. On top of that, the separation between the cowl and the neck, while it does allow him to move his head, right, so it's an improvement from a technical perspective, it makes his neck look smaller. Batman's got a thick neck. Even in the comics, Batman's got a nice thick neck here, and having a nice thick neck is part of the silhouette of looking very imposing and masculine, and instead, Batman's got this skinny little pencil neck. This little part that's poking out here is making his head look bigger and his neck look smaller, and it makes him look less imposing and less intimidating and all of that. We're having a similar problem to the George Clooney suit where his shoulders look small. And I think this is actually being exacerbated. I gotta stop saying that. I think this is being, I guess exacerbated is the only word I can use for this. It's being exacerbated by how small this symbol is. So they went to this like little logo symbol. And again, I don't like when the bat symbols look like logos. You know, I want them to look like a symbol, not like a corporate logo. But they switched over to this bat symbol. And I think you have this area here, right? You have this sort of bit here that's separate out from the rest of the thing, and that kind of seems like it's where the symbol should go, right? You have this sort of little raised area on his chest. But having that symbol there makes the whole chest look smaller. It makes the whole shoulder area look smaller. And it sort of shrinks in the top of his torso and makes the head look even bigger and makes him look almost kind of scrawny. And that's exacerbated again. Put a little counter, see how many times I say that word. That's exacerbated by the fact that his ab sculpting here is going straight down. You know, there's no emphasis. First of all, it's very wide, but there's no emphasis on it going in, right? There's no sort of emphasis of this, inverted trapezoid. Instead, it's just sort of rectangular. And that is not doing him any favors as far as making his shoulders look big and making him look intimidating. I think this suit is a step forward in a technical direction, but a step back in a design direction. And it's also very, very busy, right? There's a lot going on this suit. There's a lot of little sort of tactical things on this suit that are not really, it's distracting, it's hard to look at. He looks like a gun, right? Like the bat, it makes him look like he's a gun. He looks like some kind of firearm. I did a little edit of this one too to see what it would look like with the gray, and I don't think it really improves that much if I'm being honest. It does make it easier to read, but it doesn't really help as much as it did with Michael Keaton as far as, broadening his shoulders. I think that symbol is making his chest look really small. I think that symbol it's too little. It's not doing him any favors. It's pulling the eye inward. It's, causing all of this to sort of contract, and you're getting this silhouette that basically looks like this inverted trapezoid. Not inverted trapezoid, it looks like a non-inverted trapezoid, and so he looks like that. And that's not good. We don't want that. So overall, this is a huge technical improvement, obviously. This is a step forward in material technology, but we are having a lot of the same issues that we had before, and there's a lot of interesting aesthetic design decisions that are not doing Christian Bale any favors. And obviously Christian Bale is a big guy, and he's a very handsome guy. And, the other problem, obviously, with these tiny little mouth holes is that, especially with Christian Bale's Batman voice, it's pushing his face in like this, and then when he does this, it makes him look really goofy, and it makes his lips stick out, and it sort of affects his performance. And if they just pulled that back, foreshadowing, if they pulled that back a lot more, I think it would look better. I think people have done edits of this suit where they pulled the mouth holes back, and they look way better. I don't have permission to show you those, but you can go find them. But yeah, I think this suit is actually kind of a downgrade from the Batman Begins suit, even though it is an upgrade in a literal sense. All right, moving on to the BVS suit. This is the first time in a while that we've gotten a fabric bat suit, a bat suit that's not just like a whole bunch of rigid material. This is interesting. There's a lot of interesting stuff going on here. I don't like the head sculpt. I don't think there's enough going on with it. I think it's, especially with the dark cinematography, this is not a very high quality image, but with the dark cinematography, all of Ben Affleck's features sort of just blend together. It sort of makes him look like, let me get a different picture. We can see the problem here more. It kind of blends everything together. His head just looks like a big sort of blob. We don't really have, especially with those tiny little ears, there's just not really a lot going on here design-wise. We got the BDI problem, we've got the big head problem. We also have, the lines are here and here for some reason instead of being further pulled out, and that makes his head look kind of fat. There's some stuff I like about this. I think the torso sculpt is cool. I'm not sure what this is made of. It kind of looks like it's made of duct tape, but I think adding that texture is helping. I think there is some, obviously Ben Affleck got in really great shape for this role, but I think there is definitely some sort of rigid thing in here that's making those abs visible. There's some contouring, there's some sort of, someone's airbrushed that a little bit, because, there's no way that there's no way, flexible fabric is going to contour to your abs that way. But I think that looks good. I think this is, From the neck down, this is great. I am not a huge fan of the fat symbol, but I know it is a direct adaptation of like the Batman Returns symbol. But from a design perspective, I'm not a huge fan of it. I think if that symbol were a little bit further in and a little bit more kind of sleek and sexy, I think it would look a little bit better. But you know, this is supposed to be an older Batman narratively. It's supposed to be kind of, he's slowing down a little bit. He's more brutal. So from a narrative perspective, I think the suit works. I just think there are some issues with the cowl. I think it still has some of the same big head problems that the other ones had. There's kind of too much material around here. And those problems would be less of a problem if they didn't have this tiny, tiny mouth hole. If this pulled back a little bit more. And I also have never been a fan of the lack of trunks. The new 52 design that don't have trunks, I think it's kind of a problem. I think there's nothing to break up the surface of the suit, and it makes them look naked. And so I would love it if he had some trunks on. But overall, I don't hate it. I like it from the neck down. I have a lot of problems with the cowl, but the body of the suit, I think it looks great. I do like this little sort of ripped edge on the cape. I just noticed that. That's fantastic. That's super cool. Head sculpt is weird, and I'm not a big fan of it, but the bat suit from the neck down, fantastic. Okay, this is the tactical suit from Justice League. I like this head sculpt. This is kind of reminiscent of Night Owl a little bit. I think the goggles are actually a really cool idea because they are solving the beady eye problem. You know, basically just like one fell swoop, you fix that problem by just putting him in goggles and giving him really big eyes. And it makes the head look smaller in comparison. I think these mouth lines are pulled back a little bit from the other one. I love this sculpt. I love how streamlined it looks. You know, this is the suit that he's driving around the, you know, whatever it's called, the like weird robot thing in. So this is great. The head sculpt is great. I love it. The rest of the suit, it's very reminiscent of like the Arkham suit. You've got all these little technical things, you've got all these little like armor things, but we're building out his shoulders, which again has been a problem in past suits, which is great. There's a lot of construction to this suit, but I think also the fact that it's split up into different little pieces is solving the problem of, you know, putting the actor in this big rubber bodysuit that they can't move in, which is going to bunch up at the neck and stuff. So I think this suit is owing a lot to the Dark Knight suit, but it's doing it better, you know, because the Dark Knight suit was this sort of segmented, kind of tactical, military-looking suit. And I think this suit toned down the sort of military vibes a little bit, but still kept a lot of the tactical vibes. The lines are going in like this. You've got the inverted trapezoid. You've got the Dorito shape. He looks a lot more imposing than Christian Bale did. I think this is an improvement. I think this is a great suit. I think this looks fantastic. I don't really have a lot of negative things to say about this, except that I would like him to be wearing some trunks because, again, I am a trunks truther. I'm a bring back the trunks guy. All right, we have Batman's suit from The Flash. Oh God. Okay. Let's begin. Head sculpt makes him look old. This is awful. This is awful. This is awful. I don't know what this is, but it's awful. It's okay. I'm trying to find something constructive to say about this. It looks like he's not wearing pants. The fact that he's got like thigh highs on, but nothing here, and then like a thing on, it looks like he's in lingerie. It looks like his, you know, parts are out. All of the lines are going like that. There's no, you know, there's no stream. I don't know what to say about this. This is bad. This is really bad. We're gonna move on from this. I don't have anything nice to say. Gotham. Right, we're doing every Batsuit here. This is the Batsuit from the Gotham show. This is a very low quality image. There we go. This is not bad. Head sculpt is okay. It's only on screen for like a second, so they don't really need to make it very practical, but I think we've got a separate sort of headpiece up here, and then this looks good. This doesn't look bad. I don't like the X on the stomach. I think it is making him look chubby. This here is not doing him any favors. I would have liked to see some more kind of I keep saying the same thing, but I'd like to see a little bit more of a sort of tapering there. But overall, for a suit they had to kind of throw together for just one shot, it looks pretty good. I don't really have a lot of negative things to say about it. You know, it doesn't really need to move much. It doesn't really need to like do that much because again, it's just one shot where he's standing there. But overall, I don't really have that many problems with this suit. I just don't like the X on the stomach. I think the X on the stomach looks kind of dumb. But other than that, good job, Fox Network, I guess. We got the bat suit from the Batwoman show on the Arrowverse. This one's interesting because you can tell that the suit was designed for Batwoman, right? You can see there is this kind of like, I don't want to be like gender essentialist here, but you do have this kind of feminine shape But I do love, actually, this is really interesting. I haven't seen this on any of the other ones, but this sort of swooping scallop shape is actually really cool. I don't know what this would look like on a guy because we haven't seen it. And, you know, there are a lot of suits that will look great on the rack and then look terrible on a person, and cowls are very hard to make look good. It looked great on Ruby Rose, and it looked great on Javicia Leslie, but of course that's Batwoman, not Batman, so we're not even looking at that. But this is the suit as it was supposed to be a Batman suit. We can kind of see there's a little bit of, like, boobage there, so I do think they just kind of took the Batwoman suit and just, you know, modified it slightly. But I do like it. I do like the fact that it's not, like, made of plastic and instead it's made of, like, Kevlar and Nomex. I think that's kind of neat. It looks like it's made of, like, carbon fiber or something. I can't really speak to how the silhouette looks because, again, I can't see it on a person. But I love this scalloping here. I think that's really cool. I think that looks really good. It's sort of reminiscent of Owlman almost. You do have the face shape there is sort of nice and contoured. I can't really say that much about it because, again, I can't see it on a person, but I don't hate this suit. I think it looks good. We've moved on to Robert Pattinson, and what's really interesting is that this suit is solving a lot of the problems that I've been talking about this whole time. Beginning with the cowl here, it's kind of raised off of his face a little bit, so just like the George Clooney cowl, we've got this separation from the cowl and the head, which is, again, kind of solving the beady eye problem. And what's interesting about this Batman is that him wearing eye makeup is actually, like, diegetic, it's canonical, whereas in, you know, Batman Returns, when he takes off the cowl, he's not wearing eye makeup, so it's just sort of like, it's for our benefit. But in this one, you know, we see that he actually is wearing eye makeup under it. And so this is brought off of his face. We've got this sort of square nose, which some people didn't like, but I liked it. I think they're sort of trying to move away from the really sharp nose that they had in The Dark Knight. The line of the cowl here is fantastic. They've got it moved all the way back to the edge of Robert Pattinson's jaw, so it's not squishing his face at all. It's not creating these jowl lines. It's very, very swooped back. So we are emphasizing his jawline. We are emphasizing, you know, the very sort of tapered, sexy look here. So great job there. That looks fantastic. I think it's even further back than it ever has been in the comics, but, you know, I think this is a suit where they're really sort of leaning in to the design problems that are created from the translation from comic to live action, and they're going, okay, how do we fix that? Whether it's comic accurate or not, how do we sort of solve this from a design perspective? Which brings us to this thing here, right? This controversial piece of accoutrement, this collar thing. I think the reason this is here is because, like the Dark Knight suit, we have a turnable head, right? We have a separate headpiece and a neck piece so he can turn his head, but again, that causes the same problem it did with the Dark Knight of thinning out his neck and making the head look bigger, and so to compensate for that, we've given him this nice collar piece that is sort of making the silhouette of his neck wider without making him look like he has a fat neck and without causing this bunching and without restricting his ability to turn his head. And I think that's actually a great design choice as far as compensating for the problems that are being caused by this translation. It also separates the cape from his head, so we don't just have this blending, which of course we do in the comics, but in the comics they can draw it to look good, they can sort of cheat the fabric, whereas in a lot of the movies, that sort of unseparated out sort of flow from cowl to cape caused the whole thing to look a little bit unflattering. So this separation, I think, is doing him a lot of favors as far as making this suit look sexy. Cape looks great. We've got these big shoulder pauldrons, which are building out his shoulders, which again was a problem that I talked about before. You've got a similar sort of segmented armor thing that we saw in both the Dark Knight suit and in the Batfleck tactical suit, which I think looks great. We've got these lines that are pulling and tapering in, right? Everything is going in like that. So he looks big, he looks imposing, he looks sexy, which is important. And what I think is interesting about this suit is that it is technically one of the all-black suits, but if you actually color pick it, if you look in, this is a very dark gray. And there's a difference between this color here and this color here and this color here, right? This is the same color, but this is a very, very dark gray. And so you could actually argue that this is a comic-accurate colored suit. It's just very, very toned down, right? It's not just black on black, it's slate gray. It's black on slate gray. And so I actually did a little edit of this one. I don't know if that's really an improvement, but I think it's just kind of interesting as an exercise to see that, you know, this is actually, it is actually gray. Like if you take a curves adjustment to this suit and pull it up, these are visibly different colors, and I think that's kind of neat. I think having the suit be very matte is an interesting choice. You know, having all of this be very sort of, you know, it reads as black, but it's very matte and it's very dusty, and there's a lot of texture on it. and that allows us to see these details. That allows us to sort of separate his body from his cape, and that makes him look big and imposing, and it makes the suit more legible than necessarily the Michael Keaton suit was, and I think that is also a big improvement. This is my favorite live-action Batsuit. It's not the most comic-accurate Batsuit, but I think from a design perspective, I think it's one of the best ones. There's a lot of improvements in material technology. There's also a lot of improvements in design philosophy where they're looking at the sort of pitfalls and design I don't want to say mistakes, but the sort of pitfalls that the other suits fell into, and they're compensating for them, and they're designing sort of, seeing these problems coming and compensating for them in advance, which I think is really cool. We got these big old gauntlets. This is great. This is a great suit.